Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, for the first time in a very long time, One Piece is on break for 1 month. And of course, you know that in the final chapter before this unprecedented break, Oda drops some bombs that leave us wondering, that leave us speculating. Curb the appetite, so to speak. But of these things, the one at the forefront of my mind is Pluton. We are going to most likely discover what Pluton is soon. I have spent years, literal years, speculating about Pluton. And sometimes I say some things and people don't understand. Why, JB, why do you think this? Well, that's what this video is for. Lay it all out there so that we can get into speculations and what I think Pluton is. To be proven wrong soon, right? But until that day, let's have some fun. But before we get into it, I want to let you guys know that this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Look, I heard everything about this game from all of my YouTuber friends, but for the first time I actually picked it up and played it, and I was not disappointed. It's a free-to-play turn-based hero collector MMORPG, available on both mobile and PC. Anybody who knows me knows that I love hero collectors, summoning on banners to get the rare, legendary, or epic characters. Yep, that's what I'm about. There are over 600 champions that is possible for you to collect. Check. And one of the first things that stuck out to me is the rarities actually make some sense in this game. Rare means rare. Legendary means good luck, which I really love because it makes those characters feel special when you get them. But of course, the game provides you ways of earning epic or legendary characters simply by playing. And then you spend time in-game going through various battles, PvE, PvP, to level up your characters and your equipment in every way you could possibly imagine. There's plenty of strategy in the game to use your champion's specific skills in order to test yourself in battle, and then you can also play passively as well, if you're busy or want to do something else. The amount of content, with no exaggeration whatsoever, is truly endless, which makes sense as this game has reached its 3rd anniversary with constant updates. Speaking of which, if you download it now, you'll have the opportunity to get a new legendary character, Deliana. All you have to do is log in and play for 7 days. And if you use promo code MyDeliana, you'll be able to level it up to level 50 immediately. So this is the right time to join. In the description I have a link and a QR code. If you scan that or use that, you'll get a free starter pack worth almost $30, so that as a new player you can begin with a bang. Including the epic champion Tyrell, who I do not have. So just click the link in the description, okay? So now that you've downloaded Raid Shadow Legends, you can play as we talk about Pluton. The craziest thing I think about Pluton is over the years that we speculated about this ancient weapon, like, I can't think of anything that is more divergent. The thoughts of the community is more divergent from what we've actually been given in the story. And I think that there's good reason for that, but it's kind of funny. Like, one of the few things that we actually know from the story about Pluton, supposedly, is that Pluton is a ship. It's a ship with designs, you can make it. Some ancient shipwright from Water 7 designed it. And I guarantee you, if you ask the community, probably about 1 out of every 2 people thinks that Pluton is probably not like a ship. So some of you may be wondering, why exactly am I saying this? This is canon, this is confirmed information. Pluton is an actual ship. Be aware of the assumptions that you are making. Also be aware that the Void Century is the Void Century for a reason, and any information passed down over an extended period of time could be misleading. You may say, well, Frankie had the blueprints. He showed those blueprints to Kaku and Lucci, other shipwrights, who seemingly confirmed that Pluton is a ship. However, some of the language that Frankie uses when describing the blueprints is interesting, and I think that it opens up possibility. I want you guys to note here that the actual translation from Japanese is very nuanced, and from Funimation to Viz and everywhere, the translation is slightly different. But Frankie reveals that he has the blueprints of Pluton within his body. He shows them Pluton is on the cover. Lucci and Kaku see the blueprints and know that it's legit. Frankie then goes on to say, Nico Robin, I now understand that you are not the demon who's trying to abuse the weapon like the rumor says. What the shipwrights of Water 7 have passed down from generation to generation is not how to make the weapon. We then have a flashback of a conversation between Frankie and Iceberg. As long as there's a possibility that woman called Nico Robin will try to revive the existing weapon, those blueprints will be needed by the world to create an opposing force. We then pan back to the present day. Frankie says, "Listen, Spanda, if the ancient weapon falls into the hands of an idiot like you and starts its rampage, there needs to be another weapon to counter and stop the first one." That was the wish of the designer. So ignoring the various specificities with each translation, I think that you have some overarching themes with this conversation. First, and I think just as important as anything else, Frankie begins this conversation by acknowledging that the rumors surrounding Nico Robin were false. I personally think that there's a reason Oda included this as a preface to the conversation, and you could potentially relate it to the Pluton itself. The rumors about the Pluton are misleading. So the name that I've given to Water 7's blueprints for many years is the counter Pluton, the opposing force. And in line with this, I think that it's important to point out that not once in the entire story did Frankie refer to the blueprints as the blueprints for Pluton. And neither did Tom. If the shipwrights in Water 7 designed the Pluton and then feared that it could fall into the wrong hands and lead to the end of the world, would you design the same ship again? Or would you perhaps design a ship that is intended to kill the first? At the very least, my personal assumption is that the blueprints that Frankie had are not the Pluton. It is a superior version of the same ship, at the very least. It only makes sense that designs that were created afterwards would have been improved. But the other element of this that is really interesting is they feared the power of the Pluton. So when they're designing this new one, you would think that they would be concerned about the same thing happening with this one. So it may be modified or changed in some way to make it less of a threat against the world. Or simply more specialized. Its one purpose is to destroy the original Pluton and supposedly nothing else. So maybe at this point you're catching on to where I'm going. One of the most baffling things in the story, it's very unique, it's very special, there's nothing like it in the entirety of the One Piece world. I'm talking about the Thousand Sunny, and I'm talking about Coup de Burst. Let's just say, hypothetically, there's a ship that exists or was created, and attached to it is some sort of fearsome weapon, a weapon that can literally destroy islands. In a battle on the sea using any regular ship, you just lose. Ships cannot move fast enough to dodge this weapon, capable of destroying islands, would level a hole in the ocean. And then you put strong people on the ship itself. The only way to combat the Pluton is to be able to get close enough to it that its weapon is not in range. The Thousand Sunny can do what an entire armada of ships can't. It can fly across the ocean. I believe that Frankie memorized the blueprints and incorporated it in when he was building the Thousand Sunny, and that aspect specifically comes from the documents. Look, I think that this is absolutely brilliant. And if you go back and you look at every single thing that Frankie said when talking about the Pluton to CP9 and Spandam, it all adds up. They're expecting a weapon. And Frankie tells us verbatim that these blueprints aren't meant to create the weapon. So actually building the blueprints and incorporating it into the Sunny, they would never suspect. But I think that this also suggests something else. A lot of people think of the Pluton as a ship, but with this theory, it separates it into its parts. Yes, the weapon is attached to a ship. Yes, Coup de Burst is attached to the Thousand Sunny, and it has to be designed with those specifications in mind. But more than just ships, they're tools, they're attachments. If you want to refer to actual history, it's more so that somebody invented the cannon, and then the cannon was added to battleships. I know that some people are going to mention the Gown cannon that the Sunny has. It can actually fire a coup de burst forward in order to destroy things. I'm assuming that this is not anywhere close to what the Pluton could do. But still, it's incredible. We see pretty obviously that technology is slowly advancing in the world of One Piece. Beforehand, ships, the world government ships for instance, most are called relied on cannons. Now we see Vegapunk designing the Pacifista. Pacifistas have lasers, but so far we don't see anything that can actually destroy an entire island. I wonder if this is what Pluton actually is, the thing about it which makes it so fearsome. Not just because it's a ship. Being a ship is fun, it's novel, but the real key is the technology which made it an unrivaled weapon. But of course, this is just one theory. There are others. Some that don't require Oda to introduce anything new. I want to highlight that the designers of the counter Pluton specifically feared the Pluton falling into the wrong hands. This is a thing that I feel like makes more sense, is more intuitive, if they have some kind of reason for it, or some experience taught them this. You'll note with Frankie's flashback, Frankie had an experience just like this, where he created a thing that he didn't necessarily see as a weapon, but could be used as a weapon. It fell into the wrong hands, and it resulted in harm to Tom. Let's switch gears a little bit. This should remind you of, and it certainly reminds me of, Zunisha. I think that you probably know where I'm going here, and I believe that I was the first YouTube channel to really make a theory, a full-blown theory, speculating that Zunisha could be related to Pluton. But I think that we can all agree that Zunisha is an incredibly powerful creature, capable of destroying islands by itself. It is, or can be seen as, a weapon. And then we learned in chapter 821 in Zo, Zunisha is talking to Momonosuke, and Zunisha tells Momonosuke that in the distant past it committed a crime, and since then it has only been allowed to walk and it must follow this order. I think that it's easy to see the potential similarity here. We also have some other curious details, some newer and some older. For one, we know that Zunisha had a relationship with Joy Boy from the Void Century. We also know that in the distant past, Zunisha received some kind of order, an unbreakable command. It's important that it is unbreakable, or at least it seems that way. Zunisha could not even defend itself without permission. And it wasn't just anybody who could issue this command. Not Roger, not Luffy, not Odin. They could all understand the creature, but it is specified that they could not speak to it. The only person in the story who is capable of speaking to Zunisha is Momonosuke. However, we do know that at least one other person possessed this ability, because Zunisha was originally given an unbreakable command probably during the Void Century. So it is a power that has been inherited over time, potentially skipped generations. Similar to the power of Poseidon. Shiroshi was also able to issue, maybe not unbreakable, but it seemed essentially that, unbreakable commands to the Sea Kings. When she calls for help, they come. I like to think of Shiroshi or Poseidon as the king of the Sea Kings, and this power as potentially, the king of whatever Zunisha is. I'm pretty sure the term I coined way back in the day was Land King. And the Sea Kings specifically allude to this concept of sovereigns. They're excited for the day that the two sovereigns will meet, the two kings. One of these sovereigns is confirmed to be Poseidon, the other one is not confirmed, but you can potentially speculate that somebody else has a similar power. As a side note, many people are under the impression or believe that all three ancient weapons are people. But the Sea Kings only refer to two sovereigns and not three. A lot of people skip over this detail, but I think that it is important. When one of these sovereigns is clearly an ancient weapon, then I think it's fair to assume that the other sovereign will be as well, and the third one is something different. From the moment chapter 821 came out, I personally thought that Momonosuke has the power of an ancient weapon. That's not to say that it is an ancient weapon. However, it can be used and should be considered to be on the same level. Something happened regarding Zunisha during the Void Century, so they would have known about Zunisha and potentially the power to control it. Zunisha appears as though it was friends with Joy Boy, which is associated with and written about on a poneglyph. The poneglyphs, which are associated with the Ancient Kingdom which had three ancient weapons. We know that the Pluton was a ship that could destroy islands. Zunisha is literally a living ship. The people, the minks, live on top of it, travel around the world, across the seas. We also know that Zunisha committed a great crime, and very obviously, when you see it, you understand that it is capable of destroying an island. Initially, when I speculated this, there were some people that disagreed because it's just one elephant in Zunisha, and also Zunisha is very old. Perhaps in its prime it was a true threat, but as it stands now, it doesn't seem that way. So the addition to this theory is that there are more creatures like Zunisha. Creatures that Momonosuke might also have the ability to control, or order. Back in the day, we speculated that the shadows in the Florian Triangle were other creatures similar to Zunisha, and this speculation has only been strengthened recently. It looks very similar to the creatures of the Florian Triangle. There's also a lot of little details which really add up together. We learn from Law that the currents that surround Zunisha flow outwards, so any ship that tries to sail towards Zunisha would be pushed away. And this aligns with the fact that Thriller Bark existed within the Florian Triangle for a number of years, but never seemed to have a problem with whatever these creatures are. We also know that a mist hangs around Zunisha always, and there's a bunch of creatures in the Florian Triangle which might produce a mist of the Florian Triangle. So basically what I'm saying is that there may be an army of Zunisha, there may be one person, Momonosuke now, somebody in the distant past, which had the ability to control them. This is a power that is on the level of potentially even greater than Poseidon. It should be considered an ancient weapon and was clearly in the possession of Joy Boy of the Ancient Kingdom. I see no way that this power wasn't considered to be an ancient weapon. It is without question a thing to be feared. Used wrongly, you can understand how it could lead to the destruction of the world. So again, to reiterate, from the day that chapter 821 came out, I have been convinced that Momonosuke is an ancient weapon. Whether it is Pluton or it is Uranus, I think that it has to be Wano. But the case for Pluton has always been strong. We learn that people or creatures can actually be ships. Blackbeard has a person on his crew, San Juan Wolf, which is referred to as the Great Battleship. A person referred to as a ship, and he can actually be ridden on. And we also understand that Zunisha or other creatures like it can be misused somehow. Zunisha committed a crime. Under what circumstances? How did this happen? We don't know, but it can happen. So the idea of this theory is that the shipwrights from Water 7 designed armor for creatures like Zunisha, potentially very advanced. Something happened. Zunisha ended up committing a grave crime and they got scared. So they designed a ship that would be able to take one of these creatures down. Again here, the maneuverability of the Thousand Sunny and Kude Burst would matter. Imagine that you're facing down a creature like Zunisha with its trunk. You want to get to its backside as quickly as possible, and the Thousand Sunny can do that. Again, in a seafaring battle, Zunisha, particularly in its prime, would just win. Ships are sitting ducks, and even Double Fruit users are weak against the sea. So whatever it is has to be able to defeat the creature on the sea, and I think that the Thousand Sunny could do that. But I also think that we should think about this narratively, because it's relevant when talking about a story. And so this idea that Momonosuke is Pluton and Zunisha is the ship or another creature, I think that that is what most everyone is expecting. Or perhaps that is phrased wrong. I think that that reveal would carry less weight, because Zunisha has been very recent in the story. It's been at the forefront of our mind. We've even had panels with Momonosuke where it's described to us that he is important in some mysterious way. He can't be allowed to die. And so as we end off the last chapter with Pluton is located somewhere in Wano, and we know that Momonosuke is in Wano, we know that the poneglyph in Skypiea indicated that Poseidon could be found in Fishman Island. Poseidon was a person as well. All of this, I think, detracts from the reveal itself, and I'm expecting some kind of additional twist, or something that seems a little less obvious. But of course, this is the game that theory channels and theorists play, right? Is Oda going to take the most heavily foreshadowed route, or is he going to try and subvert the active thinking community? So let's try to argue away from this idea that Momonosuke is Pluton. The first thing which kind of strikes me as odd is, of course, the blueprints of Pluton are supposed to be a ship, and even if you design armor for Zunisha or something like that, that would be very weird. We've also argued that Pluton can simply be a weapon attached to a ship, associated with a ship, but do you really need to give Zunisha a weapon aside from its trunk? The other thing is that Sukiyaki reveals that Pluton can be found in Wano, but if you go back to Shirahoshi, right, the power of Poseidon skipped many generations. This seems similarly true with Momonosuke, as Odin did not have the power to command Zunisha, only Momonosuke did. The only reason that they knew that Shirahoshi was Poseidon is because she used her powers in front of them. Momonosuke, as far as we know, hasn't used any powers similar to this in front of Sukiyaki. In fact, Sukiyaki would be the person that I would least expect to know that Momonosuke is an ancient weapon, because he simply does not know Momonosuke very well. Momonosuke grew up on a pirate ship. When he returned to Wano, Orochi had already seized power and Sukiyaki had gone into hiding. And then Momonosuke was sent into the future, and all these events in the story so far has occurred away from Wano. And finally, the last thing which really bothers me is that Robin seemed to have a good idea, not only about where to find Poseidon, but what Poseidon's powers would be. But she doesn't seem convinced that Momonosuke is Pluton, or that the powers that Momonosuke has demonstrated are the powers of Pluton. Robin was there in Zou. She was there to potentially hear the explanation from Momonosuke about Zunisha, about his ability to speak with her. I think that demonstrating this power, plus Robin read the poneglyph in Alabasta, if Momonosuke was Pluton, all of this conversation would be framed in a different way. So my opinion is that if Momonosuke is an ancient weapon, he is not the ancient weapon Pluton, he is the ancient weapon Uranus. And the reason that Robin or anybody else doesn't know is because they have not found any poneglyph related to Uranus. So then if Momonosuke is Uranus, we go back to the idea that Pluton is a ship with some kind of ability to destroy islands, or maybe just a weapon, a technology in general that is very fearsome that has not yet been recreated by anybody. But the same as before, I do expect some kind of twist. Oda will add something. He'll be creative. That is my expectation. So is there anything else that we can potentially speculate about Pluton, about a ship that would raise the hype level of the reveal? Something heavily foreshadowed, but at the same time, not intuitive. Not a thought that is pervasive in the community. Let me ask a question. Aside from whatever power that Pluton has that makes it a fearsome weapon, what else about it is also unique, which makes it the most unique ship in the entire story? The answer to this that I have is that Pluton is the oldest ship. The oldest ship that we presume was actually used, so I'm ignoring the Noah. Let's go back to the question that we've posed several times during this video. A question that we should have is, why did the makers of Pluton fear the Pluton falling into the wrong hands? Under what circumstance was its power used wrongly? The obvious answer to this is that Pluton is a ship and somebody stole it. We've talked before about the possibility that Enies Lobby, the hole in Enies Lobby, was created by Pluton. But here's a less obvious answer, one that I find to be very intriguing. The makers of Pluton feared Pluton because it committed some sort of crime, and it committed this on its own. So I want to remind you guys that it is possible for a ship to develop its own spirit and act on its own. This is something that we got to see directly in Enies Lobby, the arc which related heavily to Pluton. The Going Merry was able to sail itself, and it developed this ability very, very quickly. From the moment that the Straw Hats began their adventure and started sailing on the Going Merry from the time of Water 7 and Enies Lobby, I mean, months had passed at most. I'm not actually going to count the time, but it did not take very long. Meanwhile, you have Pluton, which presumably sailed the seas for multiple years during the Void Century. It could have been decades. It's the oldest ship that we know of which was actually used. Frankie described the legend of the Klabautermann in chapter 351. He explains, Klabautermann, he's a legend passed down among sailors, a sprite who lives only on ships that have been truly cared for and treated well. I guess you would call him an incarnation of the ship. He holds a wooden mallet in one hand and wears a sailor's raincoat. And when misfortune befalls the ship, he runs around and warns everyone. Sometimes they say he saves sailors' lives. But to be honest, this is the first for me. I've never heard of anyone who's seen him before. We know that Klabautermann are real, and legends are based in things that have actually occurred. There has been some example of a Klabautermann at some point in the past, and I think that the Pluton could be an example. This thing is no joke, and we know that it can actually do things. In Skypiea, we saw that it fixed the Going Merry. It took off the wings that they used to travel up the knock-up stream, so it has a physical form. We also see later that it probably sailed the Going Merry all the way to Enies Lobby and back. I wonder if Pluton's Klabautermann is fully developed, essentially as powerful as this entity can be, making the Pluton fully autonomous. like a person. And like a person, it can make its own decisions, at least when nobody is sailing it. But Frankie specifically says that there's legends that it saves crew members. So I wonder if the Pluton, in its attempt to save its crew members, might have been able to fire its weapon. Again, the designers of Pluton feared that the ship might have fallen into the wrong hands because maybe there was some event which suggested it. But maybe even the people of the Void Century aren't aware of the truth. The Pluton never fell into the wrong hands. The ship used itself. I think related to Wano, we see other examples of things which are potentially similar to this. We see that as a crew loves its ship, they can kind of bring it to life. Perhaps you could say that it inherits their will. Well, there's something awfully similar to this when regarding swords. But I think that there is a spectrum, and swords can develop distasteful personalities. They refer to these as cursed swords. Will the Pluton be our first example of a cursed ship in the world of One Piece? To see a cursed ship would not surprise me. Oda relies heavily on pirate lore when developing the story of One Piece, from actual pirates who existed, names, locations, as well as their stories or legends. One of the tropes of pirate stories is the ghost ship, basically a ship with no living crew aboard. The most famous ghost ship story was about the Flying Dutchman, but it also has this element of curse associated with this. In ocean lore, the sight of the Flying Dutchman is a portent of doom. I think that Oda has obviously used this legend on 3 different instances in the story. Of course, we have an actual Flying Dutchman in the story, but it was not a ghost ship, it was captained by fishmen. We also have Zunisha. The legend of the Flying Dutchman was that it was forced to sail the seas for eternity and could not make port, which is very relevant to Zunisha's command. So Zunisha in part seems to be inspired by the Flying Dutchman. And the other thing is the Going Merry. The Going Merry is the only true ghost ship that we have met in this story, but it isn't given this curse association. But another legend of the Flying Dutchman, and this is more familiar if you've watched Pirates of the Caribbean, but those who sail on the ship play dice with death itself. Pluton, or Pluto, is the literal god of the underworld in Roman mythology. It's another name for death itself. So there is one more way that I could see that Oda could take this, and I think that it would fit beautifully in the story. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much what I wanted to speculate today. I hope that this was really exciting. I know that we talked about a lot of things that we talked before, but I wanted to add something new at the end and something that I think would be really cool. But as always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.